Could I say good evening to everyone and welcome to this evening's lecture. Infrastructure costs too much and it needn't is the title of the lecture this evening. It's going to be given by Terry Hill, Chairman of the Arup Group Trustees. I'd like to welcome everyone. Many people here will be familiar with these lecture series that we have here at the Royal Society of Edinburgh, but some won't. So a word or two about the Society. It is very broadly based. We have fellows in science, engineering, medicine, the law, business, the arts and humanities, and medicine right across the field. That is one of the great attractions, one of the great strengths of this Society. And because of our breadth of experience, we're asked by many institutions, including government, to offer advice. We are entirely independent. We're not giving polarised advice in any way, so we give independent expert advice. We're now concentrating also on our connections and interaction with society in general, and in particular the Society in the last year has formed a young academy which will be a completely new development where young people on their way up from the age of 25 to 45 in whatever discipline they are can actually apply to become members of the Young Academy. They will serve for 3 or 4 years. It will not be a prelim to becoming a fellow, but it does inject enthusiasm and novelty into the affairs of the Society. First of all, I have a little bit of business to do on behalf of the Society. This is, after all, an ordinary meeting of the Society. And the minutes of the previous ordinary meeting are in the reception area, together with a list of those who have become deceased in that period. I should also report that the ballot for the election of new Royal Society of Edinburgh Fellows for 2012 has been completed, and Sir David Carter and Professor Hector McQueen acted as the scrutineers in that process for the ballot, and report that 48% of the 1,500 fellows responded to the papers for ballot, and the names on that list were elected by overwhelming majority. And the names of these fellows has been released to the media today. So now it's time to just say a word or two about our speaker, and I'm really pleased to be able to introduce Terry Hill. He is currently the chair of the Arup Trustees. The company is very unusual in that we have the company and we have the trustees, and the trustees are separate from the company. He is the chair, and he was also chairman of the company itself for a 5-year period. He is an immensely enthusiastic civil engineer. He's currently very interested in what's happening in Scotland, because the Arup Group, several members of which are here this evening, and we're very pleased to have their support in the organisation of this meeting. But the Arup Group are playing an absolutely key role in the construction of the new crossing of the Forth. So he will be telling us about that as one major infrastructure development. But if you think about the economy in this country as a whole, in the UK and beyond, then infrastructure is an absolutely key investment area for recovery from the recession, and there's been lots of discussion about that, not least of which has been taking place today because our business secretary had one of his letters leaked to the press. So this is a really important time to have you here, Terry. Thank you very much.
My colleagues is here, I think, here, so I'm no embarrassment in quoting him when he said, for engineers, infrastructure is the greatest gift we can give to society. It changes people's lives. And you can see this one. This is one of my favourite photographs because, and it isn't that I'm a Tony Blair acolyte, it's just that he was the Prime Minister at the time when what is now HS1, the Channel Tunnel rail link, was opened, with those words behind him, and he actually said that. It is not often that a Prime Minister can stand before the words on time and on budget. So before you get carried away when I tell you that things cost too much, there are projects that do come in on time and on budget. The work that I'm going to tell you about actually started because of high-speed railways. Because having built that one, then various politicians and other people got enthusiastic about high-speed railways, and we're now on HS2 and trying to see whether we can build that. And at a certain stage of that, when a report was being given to ministers, I was sat there with a minister when he was told by somebody from the company called HS2, it'll cost 55% more to build it in this country than if we'd built it in Western Europe. Well, a minister can't take that sort of allegation or charge, and so immediately he set up an inquiry into the cost of infrastructure. Actually, what he did first was set up an organisation called Infrastructure UK, which is at the top of this slide. Infrastructure UK is a unit within the UK's Treasury, Finance Ministry. And it was actually set up under the last government, and I was asked then to join its advisory board, and then there was a general election, and then Labour were out, and then the coalition came in, and I thought, well, that's the end of that then, because it was a new initiative. It wasn't. Actually, this government gets infrastructure as much as the last government did towards the end of its period in office. And so it's kept on with the work. It's produced what's called the National Infrastructure Plan. Go and have a look at it. It's online. You can have a read through. This is the first time a National Infrastructure Plan has been published and produced in this country. Infrastructure UK, just about the organisation, its remit, it's chaired by a man called Paul Skinner, who was the previous chief executive of Rio Tinto, and its chief executive is a man called Geoffrey Spence, who I think is a long-term Treasury person. Its remit is to promote private sector investment in public sector infrastructure and to improve the planning and delivery of infrastructure. As I said, it's the first time we've had an infrastructure plan. And if you look at it, it's quite stunning what's in there. It is promising £250 billion spend on infrastructure in the next 5 years, which is double the amount that there has been in the last 5 years. So with all the tales of cuts and recession and so on, infrastructure is failing. And I'm talking about, by the way, I'm talking here about economic infrastructure, by the way, and so there is a distinction in that. So this is particularly about transport, energy, water, waste and communications, telecommunications. In that infrastructure plan, there is what I would have thought were fairly intemperate words written by Treasury mandarins, saying that what is needed is a revolution, that we're seeking transformational investment, which that quote that I gave you at the beginning is an indication of that. Infrastructure can be transformational. Get it right, get it in the right place. I know you might say this is a little detail, but London would not have won the Olympics if HS1 hadn't have been built and went through Stratford in East London. East London, when I started working there, was a down-at-heel area that I couldn't even get a taxi to take me to. It's bandit country, I was told. Whereas actually, it is now coming up in the world and is going to be the site of the Olympics. The National Infrastructure Plan has got several themes in it. Obsolescence. Because the United Kingdom was the first country to get into its industrial revolution that I recall being taught a history, it started in 1750 and went on for 100 years or so. Because we were the first country into that, it means we're the first country with knackered infrastructure, because it's that old. So a lot of the spend that we're going to be doing, 70% of it, I think it's 70% of it, is on brownfield sites. So it's about upgrading of existing infrastructure, renewal of existing infrastructure, widening of motorways, upgrading of railways, replacement of water, and so on. Obsolescence. second one, which I thought was interesting, is globalisation. What's that got to do? Because infrastructure is local. It has to be here, doesn't it, infrastructure? And that's about our economy. The economy being global means unless we have top-class infrastructure, unless we have the right investment climate for people to want to invest in, then that mobile liquid investment will go somewhere else and not come here. So globalisation of the world's economy affects us here with infrastructure as much as anything else. Demand was the other thing, and I think demand's interesting, isn't it? That actually through this recession that we're in now, the demand for infrastructure has actually held up more than other demands. You read about, sort of high street shops with collapse of demand and things. Actually, and there has been some drop in demand in some aviation routes, but by and large, more people, for instance, now are travelling by rail than have ever done so since just after the Second World War, and that was when all the demobbed soldiers were given free rail passes. So actually, demand is holding up in infrastructure, even through this recession. And then we've still got to, in all our investment in infrastructure, and I don't think we've cracked this yet, dealing with climate change. And what does that mean to our infrastructure? And last one, and this is the most intellectually challenging for somebody like me, is interdependency. Is that what we're finding is things depend on each other. You may have seen a couple of years ago when we had those floods, that there was a picture of a flooded fields and countryside all surrounding a big electricity switchgear station with the protective bunds all around it, and the floodwaters got to within 6 inches of overtopping that. If that actually happened, then the whole of, I think it was the West Country, Bristol and across into Wales, would have been cut out. So there we are. We've got the interdependency between flood protection and power security. And this keeps coming back time and time again, is that infrastructure is a complex system of systems. So those are the sorts of things that are referred to in Infrastructure UK's work and the National Infrastructure Plan, and they've got several projects that are going on, one of which I'm going to be talking about, if you bear with me, in a short while, about costs. But in addition to that, there are people working about how we can attract other funds into it. When I say other funds, the sources of bank debt and equity into infra seem to have dried up because of this with this recession. So is there a way in which we can configure infrastructure that would be appealing to pension funds? Pension funds, like yours and my funds, are particularly risk averse, and people see infrastructure as being pretty risky stuff, really. Well, first of all, I can tell you it isn't, because actually once you've got the infrastructure there in place running, it's what bankers and investors call utility grade. It's got an income stream, it's got maintenance costs and so on, but it actually is fairly predictable. The risky bit is that first 4 to 6 years when you want to build the stuff. And that's what pension funds get nervous about. And maybe they should be nervous. Maybe I should be worried about my pension fund going into that. But actually, there are ways in which we can restructure both the offering and to actually make it more palatable to infrastructure. So that's one, pension funds. Infrastructure UK put out a call for consultation about PFI. Now, I'm not going to be a defender of PFI. I just happen to be involved in a lot of PFI projects, and every one that I've been involved in is doing fine. But actually, there are some cause célèbres of PFIs that have gone wrong. If you actually try and analyse it, then about 75% of spending on PFI projects has gone well, and 25% is either sort of break even or struggled. The biggest one of all, which was the London Underground, PPP it was called, that eventually was abandoned, handed back, and now London Underground's running it directly. But there's lots of success stories with that. But should it be reconfigured? Should we look at it a different way? Is it too risky? Is it not passing risk on enough? And of course, one of the things that's been looked at is the Scottish Futures Trust and how that works in the context of PFI projects. Because whilst I might be talking about things that you think are public assets, roads, railways, all waterworks, electricity generation, all those sort of things, 70% of the investment in the infrastructure I'm talking about is private sector money. All the water companies, all the electricity companies, actually Network Rail is classified nowadays in the government books as private sector. So how does private sector money work into that? And it has a strong amount of work in Infrastructure UK, which is called Assurance, which is looking at, including the fourth crossing, which is looking at how well things, agreeing to move on to the next stage of projects. And yes, it's looking at HS2 in detail. Yes, there's a lot of planning to do, but how are we going to fund all this when we actually get to it? Okay, so let's move on. I'm going to talk about, I've talked to you about the National Infrastructure Plan that's in there. It's really interesting if you get online and look at it, and this is looking ahead in what I'm going to be talking about. You can see in there every infrastructure project that's going to be coming onto the government books over the next 5 years. There's a whole list of them. There's vast spreadsheets with all these projects. Never before has there been such transparency in what our plans are for infrastructure looking ahead. Through this government and into the next government. And then I'm going to talk about the cost review. Okay, so there we are. Okay, for quite a long time, the UK wasn't bad with its investment in infrastructure. You can see there the solid black line through the middle. That was UK spending, which wasn't that much different from most other countries, and the OECD average, that's the dotted line through the middle, up until the turn of the century. And then it dropped away. When we stopped, I mean, what was that about? Was that about saying, well, we've spent enough now? Let's slow down. Was it that other things were seen to be more important? And as I've said to you earlier, 70% of all investment in infrastructure is from the private sector. There, across the top, that's all sectors, is private sector, and then you can see the variation that there is all the way down in the different sectors. What that might be. Yeah, I've said what's in the national infrastructure. There's the numbers at the bottom: 113 billion from 2005 to 10. And then 250 billion that's contained in this national infrastructure plan in the 5 years ahead. So a big increase that's foreseen to spend in that. Yeah, I'll come back to nuclear in a minute. So it's got a vision for the UK infrastructure. It's got a clear statement of how much is needed and what the plan for infrastructure is. There was a National Infrastructure Plan 2010 that came out that actually got a good reception, but was I think the marks were a good start. National Infrastructure Plan 2011 has got a lot more detail in it, and with an additional 2.7 billion into that fund. So government not only thought it was important to invest in infrastructure, actually saw fit to put more in a year later. So that, to me, is a huge vote of confidence. And by the way, I spent most of my working life trying to get politicians interested in infrastructure and construction. Actually, not many ministers see that it's part of their life looking ahead, because infrastructure tends to take a long time to come to fruition. Why would I put my reputation on the line of approving something or wanting something when actually the benefits are not going to come until the next government or even the one after that? Whereas actually now, I think people are seeing how important it all is. So, this cost review that I want to tell you about. Actually, it's quite scary, because it goes against all the sorts of things that I thought were right. If you have a vibrant market, which there is in construction, although the construction industry in UK is very fragmented, 250,000 companies with an average workforce of 7. That's not your vision of a construction company, is it? But that's the reality of the long tail that's in the construction sector. So, but with that sort of competition, surely you would have thought construction would be efficient and costs would be driven down. We all have open EU procurement. So with the allegation that it was going to cost more, we looked into it. We probably the most rigorous evidence-based inquiry into costs that's ever been done, of getting costs indices and getting cost details from France, Germany and Spain and comparing them against similar projects and similar items. It isn't just projects, similar items in this country. And I can now tell you absolutely certainly we are more expensive here than we are in France, than we are in Spain, and than we are in Germany. We also got information and data from the Netherlands and Scandinavia, and actually got some privileged information from contractors who are working in two places, from utilities who are working in two countries, and got access to those databases and looked at it as well. And there is absolutely no doubt about it. It varies. And I think I can have a look at it. Well, okay, there we are. We've got 300 organisations contacted, 120 interviews, many of those who are in the continental Europe as well as in this country. And I'll tell you how we actually managed to get ministers to take this seriously. Because I said earlier on, I've always found it difficult to get ministers really interested in construction and this whole game, until I said how much we're talking about. Because this is aiming to try and reduce construction costs by 15% over the next 5 years. I think that's a pretty modest and conservative target to try and go for. I think we can do more. But actually this is all I could get people to agree to. Now that ends up as about £15 billion. Well, you can build 2 nuclear power stations for that. You can build probably the first stage of HS2 for that. You can certainly build Crossrail that I'm involved in now for that. But that's what gets people interested. In other words, you can build one of these projects that people actually are wanting and are saying is necessary for the economy, for this country, with no extra budget than has been forecast at the moment, that is planned for at the moment. And that's when people started getting interested into how to make construction more efficient. And of course, what the civil servants, what the people in Treasury, what the politicians first thought was, it's just that dysfunctional construction industry. They're not efficient. They're always going over budget, and therefore that isn't going to get the solution. There's just some of the examples of some of the data. And by the way, it's really easy. Just look at it online. The actual cost review report is only 25 pages long. It's quite a nice, easy read. But it's backed by a lot of data, and you can access into some of this data and have a look at it. So tunnelling costs, a lot more expensive. Road construction costs, a lot more expensive. Onshore wind costs, not too bad. High-speed rail index, a lot more expensive. So I'm now going to just tell you in 3 slides why. We'll come on to the remedies in a bit, but I'm going to just show you why. First of all, there's a range of things which you might say are explicable. They're understandable and they're unavoidable. We live in a densely populated, crowded island with aged infrastructure, and that we sweat those assets probably more. The road and rail corridor that's London, Birmingham and north, that M6, M1, West Coast Main Line corridor, is the most heavily trafficked in all of Europe. And therefore, when you do projects on there, they are more expensive. They're more expensive because they have to be made beefier. You know, sort of details like pavement depths have to be heavier. Some of the stuff that we do on the railways and the signalling systems have to be more intense. There is also evidence that we are indeed putting more money into our capital costs to reduce whole life costs. Maybe brought about by some of the PFI projects where you've got 30-year concessions, but there is some evidence that that capital cost at the beginning is higher than Western Europe, because we're trying to minimise the maintenance burden beyond that, maintenance and operating burden beyond that. Yes, we take planning and the statutory consultation processes seriously. We just do a good job on it all. Some people might think we go over the top on it. I think sometimes we just take too long about it. The Terminal 5 at Heathrow was 7 years in its public inquiry. Now, I think a public inquiry is absolutely essential. I think public consultation. Is it 7 years better? You know, is the thing that we've built in the end better by 7 years' worth? I don't think so. And yes, we're particularly strict on regulatory compliance and third-party influences on costs. But what are the drivers behind this that are inexplicable? One is the pipeline. I'll come back to this in a bit. The pipeline is, do we know ahead, can we plan what's coming up over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years in our infrastructure, and therefore can we plan for it in our business? If I'm running a construction business, can I know what's coming ahead and plan for it? No. Crossrail, I say, the project that I'm involved in, we only knew it was fully funded 3 months before we let the first contracts. That means the people who are bidding for those contracts and lining up for it didn't know whether it would be funded while they're putting the money into preparing the bids. It's crazy that way around, isn't it? So the pipeline is important to look at it. And as I've already said, you can now see that pipeline. One of the actions that's happened straight away is we've got that pipeline on the website. You can see the stuff. Only 5 years ahead. I think it would have been good to have done more than that, but at least we've got a start. We've got 5 years' worth of plans for infrastructure, visible, transparent, for all to see. Poor governance, not being clear who wants this project and what you want out of it. Incentivisation and cost and contingency management, which I'll come back to. Poor asset information. It's very variable. The water companies are a lot better. Because of the way in which the industry is structured, they have to find out what the condition of their assets are and understand what they've got. Problem at the other extreme is our 150-year-old railway and National Railway, where actually we know very little about a lot of the assets in there. And I was hearing recently that Network Rail said it'll take them 10 years to understand their assets. Well, that's amazing, really, isn't it? When we're running a national infrastructure and we don't understand what we've got and what the condition of it is. How can we plan to upgrade our infrastructure when we actually don't know what we've got? Over-specification. Sorry to come back to London. I don't know if any of you have been on the Jubilee Line in London. The Jubilee Line extension that goes out to Canary Wharf through Waterloo Station. It's stunning. The stations are absolutely cathedrals to modern transport. They're wonderful place to go there. They cost twice as much as Madrid Metro. Madrid Metro, if you go on it, it's actually a bit bland, really. You go down the stations, they have to have big signs that say what station you're at because you couldn't tell one from the other. They're all the same, the stations. They cost half. We could have had 2 Jubilee lines for the cost, if we could do it for the same cost of Madrid. So those are the choices to be made. Whether or not this is the quality of the infrastructure we want, or whether, as written down here, it's over-specification. And the procurement process, which generally in the public sector in this country is overly conservative and risk-averse. And then there are problems with the supply chain. The supply chain is how the construction industry is organised. It is a fact that if you go onto a construction site in Germany that's a Hochtief job, or if you go to a construction site in France that's a Bouygues job, then virtually everybody on that site will be employed by Bouygues or Hochtief, will have been employed by them for several years, will have been through its apprenticeship scheme and been on there and risen from a labourer up to a steward or a manager of some sort. It's the total converse in this country. If you go into a construction site, 80% of the people on construction sites in this country are employed by subcontractors or subcontractors of subcontractors or contract or whatever. Now, you could say, there we are, there's the problem. That was what some people were saying in the beginning. But we get the industry that we deserve, that responds to the market that there is. I'll show you that. So, that means there's a lack of investment in innovation. There's a need to improve skills and training. Low productivity and the whole logistics of the supply chain of the construction industry is not as efficient as it should. Let me just go over one or two of the things that I was just telling you about. This lack of a pipeline, or this stop-start nature of investment in infrastructure. This just gives you one snapshot of the water industry. The water industry is governed by Ofwat through a regulatory regime with all the different water companies, and they have funding cycles. In fact, those are the funding cycles. They're called the asset management plans, AMP 1, 2, 3, 4. See, every 5 years? Just look how beautiful the fit is between years 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and the first year not much going on and the last year. There we are. Look at those there. You know, the first year of one cycle and the last year of that cycle, and how much that goes down. Now, if you were a commercial organisation active in the water industry, would you invest in your innovation, your training, for that level or for that level? Because actually, when you're going for those 3 years, you actually don't know whether you're going to be going ahead next to it. And I can show you that time and time again with each of the industries that there are across infrastructure, that boom and bust cycle that goes there. The whole reason why we lost most of our rolling stock industry in this country is because there was a 7-year gap with no rolling stock orders. Rather than smoothing things out, we just think, well, we can press the button and all of a sudden we'll get stuff and then we'll just leave it there. That doesn't help bring innovation and quality and investment in our industry. Many large projects tend to be managed within a quoted budget, rather than aiming at lowest cost. By the way, I put a little illustration in here. This is a good example. This is the Olympics, where contingency was not given out to each project. It was held back because the contingency, by the way, is the risk money that you think. And let me try and explain something. One of the things I've got a bit of a campaign about to see whether we can change this. Some of you may have heard the expression called optimism bias, which I think is a bit of a pejorative term. It means that somebody like me, or maybe one or two in the audience, who do infrastructure projects, think we know how much something is going to cost. But people in the finance department have already said, oh, well, no, he doesn't know. I'm going to double what he thinks because I don't believe what he's telling me. Well, just think what happens to that attitude of mind. So if I could just take you through a little bit of a probability lesson, if you don't mind, if I take you through this a minute. It's a bit of a think about risk. So I've got a project, and I say it's going to cost 100. Never mind what it is. It's going to cost 100. So I come along and I say, right, here we are. I want 100 to build this and go ahead. Of course, you don't believe me. You think, actually, he'll go over budget. He won't actually sort of keep to that. So I'll put down in my books that he needs 150, just to keep it round numbers for a minute. Well, for a start, I come to know this. And do you know what happens? I'll build it for 150. And that absolutely certainly happens. Time and time again, that contingency, that risk allowance gets used, gets eaten up. And, moreover, when I finished and it was done for 150, I think I've succeeded. Because actually that was the budget that they had in the first place and I've not exceeded it. But if I go back to the beginning, I thought originally it was going to cost 100. It gets worse. Now, say actually the country has got 100, say it's got 10 of those projects, so 100 each. So actually, all I need is 1,000, I can have the lot, can't I? But each one of those, they've gone and put 50 extra on it, just for contingency. Now, I'm sorry, I don't think this is advanced statistic analysis, but adding all those up arithmetically is wrong. It is wrong. Actually saying that one of them might go over budget by 50%, fine. But another one would go under budget. Another one might be only 10%. Actually taking that 50% probability overrun and adding the lot up, but that's what happens in optimism bias, which means that we thought we needed 1,500 for the 10 projects, and therefore we're actually planning to do less than we could do, because they think that 1,500 is what's needed. So that's what Optimism Bias is about. And all of you, if you can, join our campaign. We want to get rid of that and have a proper, grown-up, mature understanding of risk on projects, up and down through government departments. And this happened, by the way, on the Olympics. The Olympics, all the managers weren't given the full contingency. They weren't given the 50. They haven't even got to know that 50 was around. They were only told it was and so they were then asked, could you please deliver for minimum cost, not just for the budget. Next one. Oh, here we are. This is the thing I was just telling you about, which is the Jubilee Line. There it is, absolutely beautiful, wonderful station. And the thing is, can we afford that with all of our infrastructure? I think every now and again it's a good idea to have it, but actually just think what we're foregoing with the amount of infrastructure we could have if we just had replication and we just had things a little bit straightforward. I don't like this slide because I think this is an Arup job, actually, that we've done. We're more rigorous with our compliance of environmental regulation. So that is a... come on, somebody else knows what this was. Is it a Dormouse Bridge? Pardon? Red Squirrel Bridge. There we are. That's how to get rodents across, and it cost £90,000 to put that. Maybe it was money well spent, but we do a lot of that. This is a bit more edgy now, and it's going to challenge you. You know, the moral maze. This one is safety. Safety. Look at that. Great Britain's on the right-hand end of that. We have the safest construction industry in Europe, which is fantastic. And I passionately believe in it. I think everybody who works in the construction industry should expect to come home at night as safe as they were when they went, as whole as they were, uninjured, undamaged. Should do that. The question is, can we keep and improve that safety, but more efficiently? Because a lot of safety nowadays is to do with what are called method statements and writing all that up and procedures and bureaucracy. I think there are ways in which we can beat that safety record, but without all of the compliance headgear that's necessary to doing that. But it's an interesting dilemma, that one, because what we can't do is say that one of the results of this exercise that I've been involved in and that we're going to try and roll out results in a less safe industry. We can't have that. Okay, so what are we going to do about it? And you're going to look at that slide for a short while I take you through those 5 areas. It's difficult to simplify this, but we put it under 5 headings that all interrelate and all feed through. First one, I've told you all about the pipeline to create better visibility and continuity of the infrastructure investment pipeline, and so bring longer-term certainty. Now, I said before, how are we doing for time? Are we all right? Yeah, I think we're okay. Is it? Okay. So I'm on this Infrastructure UK Advisory Board. There's 2 of us who are actually from the construction industry, but there's all sorts of other people around there, investors, bankers, so on, who sit there. I didn't realise the significance that this pipeline can have, the transparency and robustness of actually having a plan and sticking to it. Having a plan and sticking to it. Because we put it in there thinking about how it would be good for the construction industry, because they could see that, they could plan for it, they can invest in themselves. What I got was that this global finance that there is would actually be attracted to countries that had a visible pipeline and stuck to it. And actually, more than that, it wasn't that we'd actually attract funds in to invest in our infrastructure, and these are mobile funds that will come from the big sovereign wealth funds in either the Middle East or Norway or even China or places. But we'll probably get them a few basis points cheaper. We'll actually get our finance cheaper. That, a visible pipeline, was worth 2 or 3 basis points on the cost of finance. So that already drives a virtuous circle. I'm talking about getting construction done more efficiently and cheaper. And my colleagues, my friends on the advisory council who have a finance background were saying, and we can probably attract funds at a lower premium as well. Now, often you get nice double whammies like that. So then I talked about governance. And we start getting into a territory now that some people, when we were doing this, looked back in shock and surprise. We need to be very clear when we're doing these big projects. Who is the client? Where's the money coming from? Who's going to deliver it? Those three things. And none of those are to do with the construction and the design of it. This is to do with the commissioner, what we call the commissioner, the client, the public sector body that wants it. Who is the client? Where's the money coming from? Who's going to deliver it? Now, you might think that's nice and straightforward. That's what you do in your everyday life. You know what you want. You've got the money to do it, and you go and do it. Actually, in big infrastructure, it's never as straightforward as that. Sometimes we get ourselves quite in a mess. I have to quote the Olympics again. When we started off with the Olympics, it really was quite a mess. Everybody wanted a say in it. So we'd won the Olympics. Hey, off we go. Now then, there were 3 government departments who all thought that they owned it, and that's separate from the Treasury. Right? So there are 3 other government departments that thought they had a say in this. Then there was the Greater London Authority. Then there was Transport for London had it. Then there was the London Development Agency as well. Then there were 4 boroughs. Then the LOCOG was set up, the people who were going to run it. Then the ODA, Olympic Delivery Authority. All of those were the client. And therefore, every time you were bidding stuff out, doing design, who should approve it, who was going to give the investment authority, who was going to agree, it had to go through all of that to agree it. Well, I don't know if you can just imagine the potential in there for ratcheting up everybody's aspirations as you went through that. And actually just everyone just sign off and say, right, it's done now. We've actually agreed what we want. Now, one of the other factors that comes through that's not in any one of those, but across the lot of it, is the experience and capability of the people who are going to run this stuff. And it's hugely important that. This isn't something you can just go and do a training course in a night. You actually have had experience on delivering billion-pound projects, wherever it might be. And one of the good things about the Olympics was that they found 2 people who, despite all of this confusion and potential for chaos on the commissioning body, the people of John Armitt and David Higgins, who were both brought in, the chairman and chief executive of that, actually could see the danger in all that, and then actually went and corralled all of that client body into a clear sign-off procedure to work it out. So, and I could go through many other projects where the seeds of confusion come in about who is responsible for doing this. So, governance is all about those 3 entities that are essential: client, funding, delivery. Yeah, I think it's under the next heading now, is about discipline. There's a lot of things which cross-cut on all this sort of thing. What's actually quite difficult in complex infrastructure is to understand quite what you want out of it. Why are we building this thing? Why are we providing it? What's it for? When I was first involved in HS1, the Channel Tunnel Rail Link, we inherited it from British Rail. And the specification for the project was contained in 39 lever arch files on a shelf, 39 of them, quite thick lever arch files, that really defined everything with exceptional detail about what actually was there, nuts and bolts. And we realised actually that's not going to get the best out of the industry. So we stepped back and stepped back. We took 6 months to do it. And we compressed all that into 2 lever arch files. One was about the railway, one was about the stations. And both of those defined the client's requirement. And it was all about performance. We want a railway that's safe, easy to maintain, goes fast, lots of capacity, and a delight to use. And all of that was put into these, but concentrating on performance and outcomes rather than specifying. That enabled the constructors, the builders, to actually use their own innovation to come up, because we didn't mind really, what was the grading of the ballast, or what was the designs for the sleepers on the rail, or whatever it was, so long as it performed. And so, for good design to ensue, then we must know what it is that's wanted and say that very clearly. And that is hard. I shouldn't underestimate that. I've told you the story about contingency. There is a worry that's going up and down government departments, because what we're actually trying to say is that contingency should be held centrally. What do I mean by centrally? I don't just mean across all the different projects. I don't even mean across different parts of the country. I mean centrally. Where should that be? Because yes, projects do sometimes go over budget, and you should have that ability to fund cost overruns. But if you've got it, as I said before, then you'll use it. Okay, the next one down here, C, to instil greater discipline in commissioning the projects and programmes. This is about trying to have objective challenge early on, to really say whether or not the level of design, the level of capacity, the level of investment is really needed to get the outcomes I'm talking about. So objective challenge at the right stages in a project. Okay, some of this is a bit humdrum now. We have very little data. Now, there's been several inquiries into construction costs in the past. Some of you may recall they were called Latham, Egan. Those are the two that were actually quite well known. Actually, we flushed out about 7 inquiries over the last 30, 40 years that have looked into why construction. So why is this one any different? Why isn't this going to just go up on a shelf and be forgotten about? I think 2 things. One of them is because this has come from government and come from Treasury, rather than from within the construction industry itself. And secondly, this is being followed or held during a recession. Each of the previous inquiries were followed by relative economic health. There was either growing economy or even a boom at the time. And therefore, all of the lessons that were drawn from the previous inquiries, well, it doesn't really matter, let's just get on with it and carry on. So, but all of the previous inquiries did complain of the same thing. There's very little cost data around. Certainly there's very little cost data that's available publicly to look at. So one of the exercises in this greater discipline is actually trying to produce a national database of costs of infrastructure, so we can see what's happening. There's a lack of discipline in codes and standards. Again, this is quite detailed stuff, but there's another inquiry that's been going on at the same time as this one was going on, called the McNulty work. McNulty was looking at the total costs of the railways in this country. Why is it that as the railways, as more people travel by rail, the unit cost per person per mile by rail has gone up? Whereas in most other areas of economic inquiry, you usually find on that sort of, volume versus cost table that costs per unit go down the more you do of something. That hasn't happened with the railways. So he was looking at that, total cost of that. But one of the things he came up with, and that I'm now trying to do something about, is the proliferation of standards and the overlapping of standards and the multiplicity and duplication of standards. He estimated that he found that railways were subject to 7 sets of overlapping standards. I've got to get back to him. I can only work out 6. I've been through them all. Whether it is European interoperability standards, Euro codes, British standards, health and safety standards, group standards and individual project standards. That's my 6. I don't quite know where the 7th one is. But why is this a bad thing? Well, it can lead to confusion and so on, but actually there is an inbuilt behavioural thing that goes wrong with it. Imagine you've got 2 standards that overlap, and 2 of them apply to my thing that I'm doing here, whatever it might be. A sort of standards for building retaining walls or whatever. So there are 2 of them that overlap. Then what I might do is actually take the cheapest of those 2 and say, it's okay, it complies with the standard. Actually, we found, by looking at behaviourally, that doesn't happen. What actually happens is we think it's the right thing to do the most onerous of those 2, and that costs more. and then there's another one. Therefore, you actually sort of get a ratcheting or a stepping up as you work through all these standards, and all that overlapping actually means that the costs go up and up and up because of that. So can we simplify this? Can we actually get rid of all this? Now, this really has caught on. London Underground have committed, actually they've done the analysis and they've realised they can actually reduce their 2,900 standards and throw them all out and end up with 400. Now, whether that means that they just print them in a smaller typeface and bind them all together, I don't know yet. But that, if you read the National Infrastructure Plan, then they've been happy to go to print with that aim of reducing the number of standards and still keep quality and safety and durability and so on in there. So standards is in the next one in that. And the next one, which, as I say, which shocked an awful lot of people who are not involved in construction, was the assertion, let's design it first before we build it. And the shock of the permanent secretary of the Treasury, who looked at me and said, "You mean that we're building stuff when it hasn't been designed?" And those of us from the construction industry say, absolutely. You know, we frequently, because of various reasons, start building, pouring the concrete for the foundations before we've actually finished designing the stuff that's going on top of it. Or, particularly between systems, because I said infrastructure is a system of systems, the number of times that you build something before the M&E people or the signalling people or the heat of the vent or who have come along, and then when you've built it, they come along and look at it and you say, you mean you want me to fit my kit in there? No, it's either got to be bigger or a different shape. We've got to start knocking these walls down or drilling a hole through here or whatever it might be. It's actually, I'm doing it very crudely, but actually there's a lot in there. So we can build stuff pretty quickly nowadays. Actually, the ability of the UK construction industry to get stuff done is actually improving a lot better. So, a little bit of a maxim, let's design and plan long and build fast. But don't start until we've designed it. And so take things to a greater level of design before we start construction. So that's the greater discipline in commissioning of projects. Develop smarter ways of using competition. We're risk averse in how we bid for work and how we do it. A lot of money is spent, huge amounts of money, of people preparing these big bids. They cost several millions of pounds just to put a bid together. And then it takes us a long time when we go through various stages of bidding. We've got an example of one project that had gone through 11 stages of BAFO. You know what BAFO is? BAFO is best and final offer. Well, how can you have 11 final offers? I mean, what's that about? And that's about our risk-averse way of looking at procurement. And we learnt a lot, by the way, from French civil servants in this. And be very careful, this is nothing to do with under-the-table deals or making sure your mates get the job. This is actually about knowing the industry, actually having the commissioners on the client side understanding what the industry is. And I'll give you the example of this one. It's a tale that I tell with sadness because it's one where Arup lost out. And that is about the Olympic Stadium. And Arup designed stadiums around the world. We're good at it. It's fantastic. So the Olympic Stadium was out for bid, and we looked at it and we thought, actually, this is really quite difficult because actually it had some pretty onerous requirements in it. But fairly soon we started realising we knew what they wanted. They wanted the team that had done the Emirates Stadium. Now, you need to understand that this was being done, this competition was being held not long after, or during, I think, actually, when Wembley was going all in a bit of a mess, really. Wembley was actually not delivering, it was going over budget and so on. There were a lot of claims around and so on. So actually, the Olympic Delivery Authority were actually quite nervous about commissioning an Olympic Stadium when that was going on. And just down the road, for Arsenal, they saw a stadium that had been built by McAlpines, HOK, and Bureau Happold. Anyway, that was the group of companies that had got it. And do you know, they just wanted that team. Just in terms of how easy it would, whether they could sleep at night. They just wanted the team that had got the thing, they knew they could do it, they delivered it, there was no fuss, on time, on budget, and so on. Now, you know, I don't blame them for that. If I was in that situation, would I... Now, the reason why I'm sad about it is that we put in a bid and we lost. but actually I can see that by having an intelligent, knowledgeable client that knows the industry and actually helps develop the industry, and that's what we got from the French civil servants. If you actually see it, there is a quote in one of the backup appendices to this report. French civil servants, it is our job to ensure that the industry that we're getting bids from understands us, we understand it, and we give it a steady flow of work, and we know they're competent to do it. I think in this country, time and time again, we put a lot of work into specifying, over-specifying in too much detail the specification, and then hope that the competition will work. We just put it all out and we'll just do the least cost bid, whoever it is, never done one before, and let it go through. And that's what goes wrong. And that's what goes wrong. So being smarter about how we do our bidding, having a more risk-based approach, so you understand when you've gone far enough in your documentation, your bidding, your negotiations, actually I now know enough, and let's let the contract, because this is the team that I'm confident will be able to deliver. And that means that on the commissioning side, you have to have a commercial capability that's done it before and understands that. And that's one of the things that's quite worrying. Very often, you'll actually have organisations that are holding these bids that have never done one of these things before. So how can we get that? How can we get that cadre of highly competent, experienced people who are involved in letting billion-pound projects and more? And it might be, and the government is looking at this now, it might be we have a cadre of people who, if you like, move around from project to project and are professional commissioners of mega projects. So those are the 5 areas, those are the 4 areas that, if you've followed me, are all actions for the client side to be taking on board, which when I started on this period, I would not have predicted. I would have predicted that most of the action to do this would have been to do with the industry. But actually, most of this has come out that perhaps we're not as good as we should be. We're certainly not as good as we should be on the public sector side, on the commissioning side, on the client side of commissioning major infrastructure. So, if we have greater visibility on the pipeline, if we have effective governance about how we set up our projects, remember, clients, funding, delivery, if we have greater discipline in how we commission projects and we get smarter at using competition, then the indication is that the industry will respond to create an environment that encourages industry to invest in efficiency. That will mean, and I showed you that chart before of investment in the water industry, that means I will have the confidence, if I'm a construction company, I'm a construction products company, if I'm a designer like Arup, then I will have the confidence that I can invest in training, in innovation, investment into my products, because I know that actually the industry is going to respond to my competence. And that means that you'll get early contractor involvement who want to put the money into the future of infrastructure of this country. Things like off-site fabrication, replication, investing in products that actually will come through time and time again. The water companies, we did a lot of work with the water companies. The water companies found that across all the different water companies, they had totally different designs of their pump houses at their reservoirs. They got together, they came up with a standard. They ended up bidding those out and got them at 1/16 of the cost that they were getting them individually beforehand. 1/16 of the cost, because they just standardised on something as simple as that. A lot of this stuff is prosaic. Okay, so that work was completed. We've put it out there, so what's happening? First of all, we've got several groups that have been set up that are taking the individual elements of this. Peter Hansford, who was the immediate past president of the Institute of Civil Engineers, is now running the overall steering committee of this. Simon Kirby, who's head of investment at Network Rail, is the clients group champion, taking a lot of these that will involve the Highways Agency and the water companies and the energy companies. Steve Fox from Contractors BAM is the industry group champion. Brian Collins, I think he's now virtually is looking at data, because I said data is a big gap in that. So where are we now? Update. I think I'm coming to the end of it. We've published the construction pipeline. I was amazed how quickly we got that agreed. A lot of the civil servants says, you want us to publish the stuff of what we're going to do ahead? They were very nervous. People might read it. People might take it seriously. I said, look, don't worry. For a start, you can actually put as much confidence to it in that, and they're going to update it quarterly, update that list quarterly, so that people can... I said, it doesn't matter if you find the programme's slipped a little bit or your cost estimate's changed or whatever it is, because these things haven't got full planning permission yet or whatever it is. Just put it there so we can track what's going on. Industry Standards Group I've told you about. Project bank accounts. This is actually about, on projects, having a bank account that everybody can see, so that, particularly one of the banes of the industry, is subcontractors and small companies, SMEs, get paid. Sorry, there we are. So there's a copy. That's what you can see. Those pages and pages and pages of all these things. Industry Standards Group, Project Bank Accounts, largely for helping out SMEs. Industry Charter, which I think is there. You can't read it, but it says all sorts of good words about how everybody's going to work together. Because actually, what was amazing was I thought contractors would feel under threat. No, they were up for this, because they could see there'd be more work out of it if we can get costs down. Public Procurement Toolkit, we're working on that so that all the different commissioners have got a standard toolkit how to get the best out of the procurement process, and benchmarking data, which I've told you about. So there we are. Back to that. The aim is on time, on budget, and more infrastructure for the same amount of money. You can't beat that, can you? Thanks very much.
Well, it's a fascinating insight into what is a huge issue for the UK and our future. I just remind you of one statistic: £250 billion for the next 5 years is the expected spend. Is that correct?
That's right.
And what Tim has told us is, given us, is an insight into how we're going to get the best value, how we're going to get the best standards, how we're going to deliver it on time, how this compares, how our performance here compares with those in other countries. A fascinating insight into the future of the provision of our essential services. So now's the time for questions. Please hold up your hand. There are microphones. Speak clearly into the microphone, give your name, and we will take the question. There's the first question down on my right.
Hello. Not to be too parochial, but the obvious question is, how do you relate these grand vision to the Edinburgh trams?
Dear me. I would think, I mean, you've heard me, if you like, I mean, this is the industry that I'm in, that I've been in for God knows how many years, and therefore all the things that I've told you that are wrong, well, I'm culpable as the next person, because I've been living in this for all of this time. So probably the answer is that virtually everything I said up there that's wrong about how we don't control costs, and probably has got some, you probably can track it back, and it might be somewhere in the Edinburgh tram. I don't know enough details about it, but I would guess you could go through that in sort of a tick box way and actually find, is it clear who the client was? Is it clear how contingency is being managed? Is it clear how procurement was done? Was it finished being designed before anybody started building? You just keep going through it all, and you'd probably find a fair number of those. Now, have a go at me and say I've got it wrong because I don't know enough. You're right, I don't. But I imagine there'll be a fair bit of that in there.
Tim? one piece of advice. Do not ask an Edinburgh taxi driver that question. I did so, and I almost had a guy with a heart attack. Next question. Yes, in the front row.
Barry White from the Scottish Futures Trust. Terry, first of all, I actually agree with almost everything you said. I think it's absolutely spot on. I think the problems that you explained and the fact that many of those sit in the public sector side is absolutely right. So 100% with you in that. I have a real problem, though, with on time, on budget being the message that many people perceive as being important, because I think the budgets are often set at the wrong level, and indeed the period of time allowed for projects often set at the wrong level. So actually being on time and on budget can actually in some cases be equally disastrous as a project that is over time and over budget. Is actually getting the right budget and the right period of time to deliver a project, then being on time and on budget is a success. And I think too often it's setting the budget and setting the delivery timetable is a bit that's actually very weak, and I just would appreciate your comments on that.
Well done. I think you've got me. I mean, I was proud of that photograph that I showed you because I got a Prime Minister sounding quite passionate about infrastructure and construction, which doesn't often happen. But you're absolutely right. And if you heard what I was saying, I think it's wrong to give people targets of getting under budgets. It should be about getting things for lowest cost. That's a bit of a hangover from the boom years. When money in a way wasn't a problem, I used to tell people the best way to get projects done on time and budget is to have plenty of time and a big budget, and let's get that first. We're not in those times anymore. So I think you're absolutely right. One of the key questions we should be asking ourselves as people who want infrastructure about what are the drivers, what is the most important thing. When the Jubilee Line had to get built, the Jubilee Line extension, it had to be finished before the Millennium came in, because it was going to deliver the Queen, I think it was, but anyway, everybody else, to the Millennium Dome for the big party that happened. Therefore, money was no object at that point, and I can tell you it was £2.1 billion extra on the Jubilee Line cost. No, sorry, 1.2, I got it wrong around. Only 1.2 billion pounds extra on the cost to finish that, because time was of the essence. Sometimes it's the other way round. Sometimes it is an absolute amount of money and there's no more than that. And actually, the timetable isn't as important. But I agree with you. I think that just saying that simple mantra isn't enough in this complex world we're talking about.
Yes. Right.
If I may, it's Joe Elliott from Quayle Monroe. I think over the last 2 or 3 years in the financial crisis, we've learnt that markets are imperfect in a big way, and that the assumption of perfect markets in the stock market simply doesn't hold, that bubbles can extend for a long time. And I'm struck by the analogy between that and the sometimes simplistic view of the efficiency of the market when it comes to public sector procurers. What I'm saying is that I very much recognise your diagnosis in public servants who perhaps have spent their careers outside, well away from the private sector. In France, of course, they have a very close connection. They've been to the same kind of schools. They've got the same background. And so, in a sense, it doesn't surprise me that what you've discovered is that there's a lot to do on the public sector side, because the public sector, how the commissioning is done, drives the behaviour. So, to that extent, this is an idea whose time has come. I think we're all much more sceptical about markets and about the benefits of pure competition than we were a few years ago. So, I think the zeitgeist is with you.
I think there are an awful lot of research papers and PhDs in schools of economics, and maybe even this august body that I'm here now, to try and explain to me why, when you have an atomistic industry, in other words, the number of construction companies that there are, and you have totally open and transparent competition, and you have low cost, why this doesn't drive costs down. My answer is that it's complex, high risk, and a sticky priced industry. that actually just doesn't respond to competition that way. But that isn't a good enough academic answer to why competition doesn't give us the most efficient answer. And I find it quite a puzzle. And I certainly, when I started with this piece of work, that was my aim, to try and uncover why good competition, because in most other areas it works, why good competition doesn't end up with the best value. And it quite clearly doesn't.
Yes, in the centre, halfway back.
Hello, it's Peter Ricci. I'm a member of the Young Academy here, actually. Could you just permit me to extend the analogy on optimism bias, where I think you got a bit of a sigh and a laugh at one go? That was round one. In round two, we recall that we got to 150. In round two, the adder-uppers look back to what happened before, and they give the estimate of 150. And then we add 50% onto that for contingency, and we get to 225 for the next one. So do you think that really we've just addressed things the wrong way by making allowance for not being very good rather than by getting better?
Yeah. First of all, I purposefully did easy round numbers. The actual number is 66%. So you're right, in a way, is that if I came up with a number and gave it to the finance ministry, they'd add 66% because they reckon I'm just optimistic. What was the difference between optimist and pessimist? Optimist just doesn't know enough. I think it is. I can't see any alternative other than just try and teach people who manage budgets simple statistics and probability, and just try and think of that. Not complex sort of chi functions or anything like that, just simple probability and what goes on, and team that up with behaviour. And I mean, for instance, give people the right to keep the money they save. I don't mean in their pockets, I'm not talking about that. I mean in their businesses, in where they're doing, so they can carry it on to the next year, on to the next project, or whatever it might be. So you realise, actually, if you do deliver it at less than the cost you first thought of, then you will gain out of it as well. And I think there's a whole area where we could do that. It certainly works on these 5-year spending plans, having some flexibility of year-end flexibility, carrying it over. It also means that it should work when you've got a whole programme of projects, when you could carry that money over onto the next project. And everybody then would be delighted, because, as I say, we'd actually get more money, more done for the money that we first thought we had.
Could I just intervene here? If I got it right, your slides showed that the UK is less good at this than other countries.
Yeah, absolutely.
So this can't be some magical, impossible secret to achieve. Why is it so difficult?
Why is it so difficult? I think that, already in what I've given you, I've simplified what is a complex area. The infrastructure is probably some of the most when you're talking about infrastructure at the billions I'm talking about, then I can't remember, anybody got off the hand what the estimate is for the whole HS2 all the way from London to Edinburgh, Glasgow? I don't know what it is. It must be Okay, 30 billion. I once heard of a student who went to a physics lecture and was sat at the back of the hall when the professor said that the sun is going to die in about sort of 5 billion years. And he put up his hand. Did you say million or billion? And he said, no, billion. And he said, oh, that's all right then. So we're talking about very big numbers here, and complex systems, and very complex systems. So I've tried to simplify what I've shown you a lot in trying to give you the lessons. I know you'd like me to give you the one killer application. I think it is, if I boil it down, and some of my colleagues disagree with me, and they might be, by all means, disagree with me. I think it's the calibre of the people that we have who are defining and commissioning and the project. That isn't saying that the people who do it now are dumb. That's not saying that. It just, most people don't do this very often in their lives. Actually go and get these things delivered and commission them and do that. And therefore, I think that's the thing. And therefore, people being encouraged, just encourage a bit, to take risks in how they want to procure this thing and having faith in the organisation that's going to deliver it.
Right. A couple more questions. Yes, in the front, and then one at the back.
Duncan Clark, no relevant background to construction. You touched on the organisation of the construction providers, construction companies, and contrasted the way in which it was organised in this country compared with Germany, say. And as I understood it, the, say, German company employed a much larger proportion in-house, did much less outsourcing.
Yeah.
Can you comment on why that is? And it seems to me very strange because in many other spheres it's seen to be a good idea to outsource because you can reduce costs and you have more flexible company. Could you comment further on this?
Yeah. First of all, let me be clear. I actually don't think per se outsourcing is a bad thing. I think actually it's a good thing. I think the reason that drives it is, I think I keep coming back to that diagram I showed you. Why would you employ thousands and thousands of workers if next year you only had half your turnover that you had this year? Why would you do that? And therefore, by outsourcing, you can protect yourself, you can hedge yourself against that likelihood as it happens up and down. But I don't think there's anything wrong with the structure of the UK construction industry and having what really are seen as construction managers and then a whole supply chain of subcontractors and suppliers below that, if you have stable relationships. And one of the things that we're trying to do now is encourage contractors to actually have long-term relationships with their subcontractors, with their plant hire companies, with their steel fixers, with their, and concrete supply, and so on, and have long-term stable relationships. Because if you think about it, if you fragment the industry into all these, how do you innovate across boundaries? How do you actually look at new techniques? If you actually have stable relationships between them, then you can jointly see how to re-engineer the process that you've got. Actually, the construction industry hasn't seen the... I don't know what people around here think. It amazes me the sophistication time and time again on the next mobile phone that I get or the next car I get. It used to be once upon a time that you wouldn't want to have a car in its first 6 months or a year of a new model coming out. Actually, now they come out, they work, they get on with it, they're fine. Construction hasn't managed to achieve. It has in some sectors, it has in some parts. But generally, on things like facades on buildings and so on, and the way in which we can design stuff in 3D and then get things manufactured that way. Some of those areas, but nowhere near the pace that happen in other sectors. And that's a product of a fault of the fragmentation of the industry, but more importantly, I think it is because of the stop-start nature of investment in infrastructure.
Time for one more question. In the centre, the lady in the centre.
I have no experience myself of this industry, but I do have a wee story of going and visiting our beautiful new waterworks out at Flotterstone that is on time and on budget. You haven't really mentioned politics. I was at a meeting from the Water Board, with politicians talking about the future of our water industry. There was one politician whose political dogma said it really should be privatised, now, at once. But the meeting I was at, some 50 people in the local library said, it's our water, it's essential substance. We would like our water to be kept nationalised. In your infrastructure of this country, how does that dilemma of political dogma and public ownership match out?
For a start, you're right, I've not mentioned politics, and I will do in a second. However, all the lessons that I've told you about today, all the findings, are actually neutral to whether it's public or private sector. Because actually, as I said, private sector is a big part of the investment in our public infrastructure. Whilst actually the best examples in infrastructure actually came from the water industry, there were actually some bad examples there. And so the faults that I'm talking about actually are fairly agnostic to whether it's public or private sector. That's not the issue. However, politics is absolutely totally enmeshed with infrastructure. It isn't like, you know, investing in a distribution centre or a hypermarket or something like that. Politics is fundamental to infrastructure, no matter how much we analyse it. I remember there's another story that one time, if you've got a week or two, I could take you through, which is how Arup got involved in creating the first high-speed railway in this country, and that was quite a story of doing things that you wouldn't expect a consulting engineer to do with lobbying and pressure groups and so on. When we won that campaign, a lot of the detractors then said, "Oh, that was just a political decision." And my answer was, what are politicians supposed to do? They take the political decisions about these things that do change our lives. You know, they are not insignificant things. They change our lives. They have impacts on us that we resent, but they also had huge benefits that we do. We did another project between Denmark and Sweden. It's called the Resund Bridge. It connects Copenhagen with Malmö. Before that was built, Malmö was a bit of a rundown area of Sweden. It was actually struggling economically. Once it was connected to between the two of them, then initially we didn't get the throughput on that bridge that we thought we were going to get. Actually, I was just in Copenhagen recently. There is a campaign to get it doubled in size, because actually it is now big, and the whole of Malmö now is almost a reborn part of Sweden. Absolutely fantastic. So infrastructure has got, you know, time and time again, you know, for every Humber bridge that unfortunately hasn't it, I can give you a dozen major infrastructure investments that have totally transformed people's lives, places, and so on. That's politics.
Well, I'm going to now ask Professor Gareth Pender, Professor of Environmental Engineering at Heriot-Watt, to propose the vote of thanks. Gareth.
Thank you, President. Like Terry Hill, I'm a civil engineer, and it's been a real privilege to sit here tonight and be addressed by a man who clearly is at the top of his profession. A problem has been identified. Terry has played a key role in analysing that problem and identifying some useful actions that will have an impact in future, and that is essentially the essence of civil engineering. So I'm delighted, as I said, to have heard this. Terry also has excellent communication skills. I think you'll all agree that the way in which he delivered this talk really was outstanding. It was a complex message, but he got it across very clearly, and he peppered his talk with some useful facts to keep us interested. The ones that stood out for me is, the President has already said, 250 billion, I nearly got it wrong there, billion expenditure on infrastructure projects over the next 5 years. I'll come back to that at the end of the vote of thanks again. The fact that UK construction is more expensive than our European benchmark nations. And another one I found extremely interesting, 250,000 companies in the construction sector with a workforce of 7 or less. That for me really is a staggering statistic. The essence of Terry's talk was the sort of important points about the pipeline and how it's necessary to have a pipeline of infrastructure projects to encourage investment, governance and how we are limited with the number of people who have experience in governing and managing really big projects, discipline in commissioning these projects, the use of smarter competition to help develop the construction industry, and if we have all these things, how the industry itself will invest in efficiency. And the other interesting fact there was that many of these things rest with the client side and making sure the client side is doing its work properly so that the industry can get on with its part of the business. I think this comes back to an old chestnut of the institution of civil engineers, which is that if we had more civil engineers actually in the governance and finance side, then the industry itself might benefit as a consequence of that. Terry also encouraged us to do a bit more reading, and I'm off home to download the National Infrastructure Plan and the Cost Review Report and have a skim through these before I go to sleep tonight. It was also interesting for me to be here as an academic because universities are also part of this pipeline, and you might have noticed in the first slide that tonight's talk was co-sponsored by the National Telford Institute. The National Telford Institute is a Scottish Funding Council initiative, and they have invested in civil engineering departments across Scotland to encourage us to work more closely together in terms of doing research that is relevant to the supply and delivery of infrastructure. So it was also interesting for me to listen to this and generate some research ideas that might be of use to the National Telford Institute. Finally, coming back to the £250 billion projected spend, next week I'll be talking to a group of school leavers who are considering taking on university courses in the construction industry, and I'm sure it will be very reassuring to them to hear that there's a commitment and there indeed is a national infrastructure plan that plans to spend that amount of money, because they are part of the future in delivering this plan. So I'm absolutely delighted I came along tonight to have heard this fascinating and extremely useful presentation from a true expert in the field, and I would ask you to join me in offering Terry a vote of thanks in the usual way.
Well, Terry, could I just add my thanks to the audience for coming. This will be recorded. It will be on the website of the RSE within, I think, 2 or 3 weeks. So you'll be there in perpetuity and you can look at it. Thank you for being so enthusiastic, and to bring that enthusiasm, clarity and experience to this huge area must be important for this country. Thank you.